The wind tore across the plains of eastern Wyoming, rattling the wooden walls of the lone ranch house like fingernails on a coffin lid. Dust swirled in the twilight, catching the last streaks of sun and turning them copper, almost alive in their movement. I had lived on this land for as long as I could remember. Since my father died, it had been just me, the wind, and the ghosts of what was lost. Some nights, I swore I could hear them whispering between the dry grass. I was checking the fence line, lantern in hand, when the sound first reached me. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe an animal trapped somewhere, but then the faint, desperate rasp pierced through the howl. "Please, help me." My blood ran cold. It came from the old storage shed at the far edge of the property, the one I hadn't dared enter in months. The boards were cracked and warped, leaning as if they had given up fighting the years and the weather. My hand dropped to my revolver, instinct taking over before reason had a chance to argue. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of old straw, but beneath it, something sharper, acrid, blood. My lantern trembled in my grasp as I stepped closer. That's when I saw her, a young woman, bound in a burlap sack, struggling for air, her voice fragile and raw. I didn't hesitate. The knots burned my fingers as I ripped them apart, but I couldn't stop. I had learned long ago that hesitation could kill. The sack peeled away, revealing a face pale and bruised, lips cracked, eyes wide with terror. She coughed, gasping, but didn't scream. Somehow, she knew survival depended on silence. I wrapped my coat around her shoulders, ignoring the sting of sweat and blood that clung to it. She leaned against me like a broken thing, and I promised myself then and there, whatever it took, I wouldn't let anyone take her again. Outside, the wind didn't stop. But inside the shed, for the first time in a long while, there was a quiet that wasn't just my own. Her name, barely whispered, slipped through trembling lips. Clara. I pressed a hand to her back, letting her catch her breath before moving. The evening sun had vanished completely, leaving the plains bathed in grey shadows. My ranch, my solitude, had never felt smaller, more fragile. And yet, for the first time in years, I had a purpose beyond surviving the wind and dust. Protecting her became everything. She shivered violently despite my coat, and I realized how little she had been shielded from the world. Whoever had done this wanted her hidden, trapped, invisible. And now I knew the threat wasn't gone. It was closer, waiting, patient. I guided her to the house, keeping my revolver within easy reach. Every creak of the wooden floor, every gust of wind sounded like a warning, a reminder that out there, danger didn't sleep. Once inside, I set her on the cot near the fire, working quickly with water, cloth, and whiskey to clean her wounds. Her skin was pale under the bruises, and every touch elicited a flinch. Yet, she didn't collapse or cry out. She had survived this long. She was still fighting. I thought about my wife, lost to fever when I was younger, and my daughter after her. The emptiness of those losses had once been everything, but now I had someone who needed me, needed protection, someone who could not afford mistakes. As the night deepened, I watched Clara doze lightly, eyes fluttering, body tense even in sleep. Outside, the wind still screamed across the plains, indifferent to human suffering. But inside, the fire offered warmth, a small rebellion against the darkness. Somewhere far off, I knew the men who had taken her lurked, waiting for a chance to strike again. They wouldn't stop. Not until they got what they wanted. And I would make sure they didn't. By morning, the sun barely cut through the grey horizon, but I could see fresh tracks in the mud near the barn. Horses, boots, too deliberate to be stray. My chest tightened as I knelt to study them. The gang had been here. They had circled, searching, leaving their mark as if to warn me. They thought hiding Clara on my land would go unnoticed. They were wrong. I made her sit by the fire while I scanned the house, checking locks, bolting doors, and reinforcing the trap of a shed door with scrap iron and timber. She watched silently, eyes wide, bruised, but steady. There was fear, yes, but also determination. She wasn't broken. Not completely. She had survived their cruelty, and somehow she had kept her will intact. That alone made her dangerous to them. Her story spilled in fragments. A wagon train, a late-night raid, masks, and ruthless men who spoke of selling her across the territories. My fists clenched. Fort Rock, they had said. The name stuck in my mind like a stone in my gut. That place dealt in human lives, and Clara had nearly been swallowed by it. I felt the familiar ache of loss, the ghosts of my wife and daughter pressed against me, a cold reminder that protecting someone wasn't enough. Survival required vigilance, cunning, and willingness to face men who had no conscience. I fetched a coat from the cedar chest, soft and faded, once belonging to my wife. I draped it around Clara's shoulders. The scent of lavender and cedar clung faintly, and for a moment she blinked, uncertain. That coat was my past. Now it became her shield. I silently swore to myself. Whoever came for her next would face me first. The night was restless, a restless wind rattling the eaves and carrying the distant howl of coyotes across the plains. Clara slept fitfully on the cot, her breathing shallow, interrupted by dreams I couldn't reach. Outside, the shadows lengthened, and I knew the men who had taken her weren't idle. They moved like predators, and I had no illusions. They would come back, sooner rather than later. I patrolled the yard, lantern swinging, eyes scanning every fence post, every shadow. The barn door had been reinforced, the windows barricaded, yet even my precautions felt fragile against the vast emptiness of Wyoming. This land had no walls to keep the world out. It only tested those who dared call it home. My revolver weighed heavily at my side, the weight a constant reminder that patience and precision could be the difference between life and death. I thought of my family, of the cold graves where fever and loss had taken them, and I let that ache harden into resolve. I would not fail again. Clara's presence pulled me from the endless solitude I had carried for decades. Her survival now depended on me, and I would meet that responsibility with every ounce of skill I possessed. By midnight, I had crafted traps near the shed and the barn, simple but deadly. Nails, hidden pits, loose boards, anything to slow them, to give us a chance. Every sound carried in the night, the rustle of dry grass, the cry of an owl, the faintest footstep. I imagined their approach, shadows creeping across the plains, thinking they were clever. I smiled grimly. They had no idea. Dawn broke pale over the plains, turning the wind to a sharper chill. Clara had woken before me, sitting quietly by the fire, her hands wrapped around the cup I had filled with water. I could see it in her eyes. The fear hadn't vanished, but it had sharpened into something else. Awareness, readiness. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was learning, adapting. I admired that. The tracks from the previous night were still fresh, though scattered now by the wind. Whoever had come had left in a hurry, but I knew it wouldn't last. They would return, and when they did, they would be more dangerous, more prepared. I taught Clara quickly how to move quietly, how to stay low, how to anticipate. She listened without question, absorbing each word, each movement, her eyes hardening with determination. By mid-morning, we had reinforced every entry point, secured the barn and shed, and mapped escape routes through the surrounding hills. The silence of the ranch was deceptive. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every gust of wind could carry a warning. I reminded myself, the plains give no mercy, and neither should we. She helped me tie traps and reinforce barricades. Her hands, once trembling, now moved with careful precision. A shared understanding formed between us, unspoken but clear. This wasn't just protection anymore. It was defiance. And when the first distant hoofbeats rose against the morning light, we were ready to face the men who had tried to claim her life. By mid-afternoon, the distant clatter of hooves warned me before I even saw them. 3 figures rode hard across the ridge, sun glinting off their rifles, their intent unmistakable. Clara froze beside me, eyes wide but steady. I gripped my revolver and studied their approach, heart hammering in rhythm with their hooves. This was the moment we had prepared for. The first rider spurred forward, voice carrying across the dry grass, demanding Clara's return. My jaw clenched. They thought threats and force would bend her will, but they had never faced someone who had survived what she had endured, or me, for that matter. I kept low, letting the wind carry our silence as they drew closer. The tension was sharp, like a drawn bowstring ready to snap. I fired first, a warning shot that kicked up dust near the leading horse's hooves. The animal reared, throwing its rider off balance. Clara instinctively ducked behind me, hands tightening around the coat I had draped across her shoulders, the scent of cedar and lavender clinging faintly. The second shot, precise, kept them from pressing further, and the third reminded them that we were not easy prey. They fell back, eyes narrowing, but I could see the calculation in their movements. They would not give up. Not now. Not ever. The plains around us, once empty and silent, now felt like a battlefield. We had survived the first wave, but the war was far from over. Clara's gaze met mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of determination matching my own. We wouldn't run. Not this time. The wind had died to a restless whisper by late afternoon, leaving the plains unervingly quiet. Clara and I moved through the barn and yard, inspecting the traps and barricades we had set. Every nail, every loose board, every hidden pit held a purpose now. I showed her how to listen for subtle signs. Hoofbeats carried differently in soft soil, shadows shifted when someone approached with intent. She absorbed every word, her eyes sharp, her movements deliberate. We spoke little. Words weren't necessary. Survival demanded action, not chatter. I traced the line of the ridge where the riders had come from, noting every potential approach. Clara's hand brushed against mine as she leaned over a trap to adjust it, and I felt a strange, protective warmth. We were not just allies now. We were a team, bound by necessity and by a shared determination to survive. Night crept over the plains, stretching shadows across the fence posts and corral. I stoked the fire inside, checking Clara's injuries again. She had bruises and cuts, yes, but the color had returned to her cheeks, and her breathing was steadier. She had faced the gang once and survived. She would do it again. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest sound of movement. I stiffened, hand resting on my revolver. Clara mirrored me, a silent signal passing between us. They were out there, watching, waiting for a mistake. But we were ready, and for the first time, I believed we could turn the tables. Night had fallen fully, painting the plains in deep shadows that swallowed the ranch whole. I stood by the front gate, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the faint outline of distant ridges. Clara crouched beside me, her small hands gripping the edge of the railing, ready to move at my signal. The quiet had an edge, a tension that settled into our bones like cold steel. Then, a faint shimmer of movement. 4 riders emerged from the darkness, careful, calculated, circling the property. They had learned from their last mistake. No reckless charges this time. Their eyes glinted under wide-brimmed hats, rifles raised, fingers twitching near triggers. I counted them slowly, methodically, committing every detail to memory. Clara shifted, barely audible, a reminder that she was watching, learning, adapting with me. The first shot rang out, a warning, sending dust into the night. The gang flinched but pressed forward, moving with precision now, covering one another like seasoned hunters. I adjusted my aim, thinking of all I had lost and all I was determined not to lose again. Clara's hand brushed mine as she prepared the traps we had laid earlier. Her confidence had grown. She no longer flinched at gunfire. A flash of metal, a shot grazing the fence post, and the battle was underway. Dust swirled, horses screamed, and the plains echoed with the sounds of confrontation. We were outnumbered, yes, but every movement, every trap, every calculated shot gave us leverage. The gang had underestimated us once. They would not make that mistake twice. Not tonight. The night erupted in chaos. Horses reared, hooves clattering against the dry earth, and gunfire echoed like thunder rolling across the hills. I fired steadily, one shot at a time, while Clara moved with a surprising grace, guiding our traps and even tossing small objects to startle the riders. Each shot we took, each distraction we set, forced the gang to hesitate, and hesitation could be fatal in this land. Clara was no longer the trembling girl from the shed. She ducked behind barrels, peered through shadows, and even used the rifle I had laid out for her. Her hands, once weak and trembling, now gripped it with intent and precision. I caught her eye once, and in that glance I saw fire, the same fire that had kept her alive all this time. We were a single unit, instinctively moving, responding, surviving. A rider fell into one of our hidden pits, a startled scream cutting through the gunfire. I took the opportunity to pin another against the fence, forcing him to retreat. The gang was faltering, their coordination breaking under our vigilance. Every step they took toward us now carried uncertainty. Clara's courage, her quick thinking, had shifted the balance. The wind howled as if urging us on, and the ranch, once a fragile haven, had become a fortress. I realized then that we weren't just defending a patch of land. We were defending the promise of survival, of justice, and of life reclaimed from the brutality that had hunted Clara. The night was far from over, but for the first time, I believed we could survive it. By the early hours, the gang's momentum had fractured. Only 2 riders remained, desperate and reckless now, their confidence eroded by our traps, our fire, and Clara's unexpected skill. I crouched behind the corral fence, rifle steady, every heartbeat echoing in the cold night. Clara moved beside me, breath measured, eyes scanning the shadows. This was it, their last chance, and they knew it. A flash of movement signaled the first charge. I fired, clean, precise. The horse screamed and spun, throwing its rider into the dirt. Clara, following instinct, rolled to the side and kicked a hidden board, sending the second horse stumbling into a trap we had set earlier. They were cornered, scrambling for control, no longer predators but hunted. The silence that followed was brief but absolute, broken only by the rasping breaths of men who had underestimated us. I advanced slowly, revolver raised, Clara trailing, her hands steady now, her courage solidified in the chaos. I could see the fear in their eyes, the realization that their reign over terror had ended. This land, my ranch, and the girl I had saved would not yield to their violence. As dawn crept over the horizon, spilling gold across the plains, I watched the last rider retreat, dragging his horse behind him. Clara exhaled, a long, trembling breath that carried relief, exhaustion, and something more, the first taste of freedom she had known in weeks. I finally allowed myself to relax, though only slightly. The fight was over, but its echo lingered in the wind and in our bones. For now, we had survived, and we would endure. Morning broke over the Wyoming plains, painting the land in soft gold and silver mist. The wind had finally stilled, leaving a quiet so complete it felt almost sacred. Clara and I stood side by side on the porch, surveying the ranch that had been our battlefield, our refuge, and now our sanctuary. The remnants of the night's chaos, the hoofprints, the broken boards, the scorched earth near the traps, were fading under the sun's gentle touch. Clara's injuries were bandaged, her spirit renewed. I had watched her grow from a terrified girl trapped in a burlap sack to a woman who could face fear without flinching. There was a resilience in her now, a spark I had not seen before. And for the first time in years, I felt that same spark within myself. Not just survival, but purpose. Protecting her, fighting for her life, had pulled me from the shadows of my own grief. We moved inside, clearing the remnants of battle and settling back into the quiet life of the ranch. I made coffee while she tended the small garden by the kitchen window, the smell of pine smoke and earth filling the house. I realized then that the plains, vast and indifferent, had given us a gift, not only survival, but the chance to begin again. Clara turned to me, her smile fragile but honest. In that moment, I knew we had both reclaimed something we thought lost forever: trust, safety, and the beginning of a home. And as the sun dipped low over the distant hills, casting long golden shadows, I thought about the stories waiting on the wind. The Old West is harsh, cruel, and unforgiving, but it also holds quiet victories, moments of connection that make it all worth enduring. If your heart raced with every shot, if your breath caught as Clara stood brave against impossible odds, then you understand. Hit that subscribe button, because there are more stories waiting just over the next ridge. Tales of grit, courage, and the quiet strength of those who refuse to surrender. See you on the trail, partner.